Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 30th of March, 2025, and we come to you tonight with a live stream, as the title suggests, the all about the coming defeat of imperialism in Ukraine and what this could mean. Now, I would urge everybody to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. We are live tonight on Rumble and on Locals and on YouTube, Twitch, and X. So, like and share away. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. So, tonight we are here to talk about the coming defeat and disaster for US imperialism and its allies, or lackeys, if you will, in Ukraine. And we are going to be talking about that in just a moment. But first, greetings to those who've shown up in the chat so far. We've got Thomas Wolfe, we've got Albert coming to us from the Republic of Croydon, we've got Agricola, and we've got Caustic Grip. To answer Agricola's question, we are currently without a musical intro. One is being worked on. So the way we're going to do the intros is changing. So keep an eye out for that. New intro coming up quite soon. Again, we will keep you posted. So good evening to Daniel out there in the West Country, to Luca, who comes to us from defeated Albion, indeed. It was defeated a long time ago. It just took them 100 years to realize it. Hello to Roddy. Hello to Jeremy Turner. Hello to Nush82. So let's take a look here. And yeah, okay, all good. And okay, so we are talking tonight about the state of things when it comes to the war in Ukraine specifically, and related issues. So, to explain the title, "The Coming Defeat of Imperialism in Ukraine," what this means and what this refers to is the fact that the negotiations between the US and the Russians, whilst of course hogging a lot of headlines and producing a lot of fevered commentary, especially, well, from the US and the Russian side, it should be said. Both are guilty of fevered over imaginings. Now, what's actually been agreed so far is very little, and what can be agreed with regard to Ukraine is very little. Let us first set out the theoretical and historical basis upon which I'm making this claim. Now, Trump and his immediate collaborators, if we take them at their word, when Trump says, "This war, so stupid, so stupid, we should never have got involved in it. It's a terrible war, awful, no good, no good for us." If we take him at his word, and let's take him at his word, I think he does actually think this, then Trump doesn't understand the first thing about the system that he is supposedly the head of. The war in Ukraine, the way that Trump presents it, proves that he has not the slightest understanding of how imperialism actually works, and not the slightest understanding of what the war in Ukraine was for, or what the 30-year project that the US has been involved in since the breakup of the Soviet Union was for. And now, the fact that he doesn't understand this, and that the sycophants around him don't either, is good from our perspective, because that just confirms that the US is on the slide. It can't even have a capable leadership anymore, and it's divided at the very top of its state structure. Now, what the war in Ukraine was actually about, as we have emphasized on this channel pretty much almost every time we've broadcast, we've mentioned it, but let's re-emphasize the point. What the war in Ukraine was about was not Ukraine. It certainly wasn't control of Ukrainian resources. That's a side benefit if you manage to get it. The war in Ukraine was about the much, much bigger prize, which is Russia itself. That's what the war in Ukraine has always been about. It's never been about possession of Ukrainian resources or land. Yes, the imperialists want to get hold of that, as they want to get hold of everything. So, yeah, that's standard stuff. But the bigger prize was always Russia, which is why Ukraine was brought into the control of US imperialism and British imperialism. It's why two coups took place in 10 years. It's why the US and the British, the Canadians, and others armed and weaponized and mobilized fascist forces to run Ukraine as a outsourced military base for US and British imperialism in particular, and to have this done for the specific purposes of creating a situation where imperialism could hope to destabilize the Russian Federation. Yeah. This has been the game from the start. This has been the game, well, to be honest, even in the 90s, this was the game, because this was what the US was up to and the British were up to in Chechnya, in a war that it is widely acknowledged now amongst anybody who with half a brain that the US and the British were involved in that war. And Putin has said it over and over and over again, going back 20 years. Going back, in fact, if you look at Putin's speech after the Beslan school massacre, almost 20 years ago now, he blamed external actors for inspiring that. So one of the worst acts of terrorism, which killed a load of Russian children, Putin publicly accused the US and the British of being involved in it. Now, it's therefore making his insistence on referring to them as the partners either an act of bitter humour or the act of essentially a group of compradors. And now, I don't think that is something which applies to Putin himself, and certainly after it, throughout his presidency, he proves that he's not that, not quite anyway. But certainly the fact that the US and the British could be widely believed to be involved in acts of grotesque murder against Russian civilians, and the Russian state still kept referring to them as the partners and wanting a deal with them. Well, this tells us an awful lot about the balance of forces inside the Putin system, which is that at that stage, the comprador bourgeoisie still had a hell of a big influence inside the Russian government, to the point where the US and the British could literally kill school children via their Chechen proxies, and the Russians barely responded. Now that's an interesting thing to think about, and a horrifying thing to think about. But it just underlines the point that the Putin system is much more complicated than the imperialists will have you believe, given that it has all these different elements. And I would recommend the work of Professor Sakwa, Professor Richard Sakwa, an English academic who has done numerous books on the Putin system. He's of a broadly, I would say, liberal persuasion, but he is an honest scholar, even if his perspectives aren't those that I would agree with. He has chronicled quite accurately, I think, the state of play within the Russian system, and the fact that you have these different influences. You have these still pro-Soviet influences. You have Russian bourgeois and sort of national bourgeois nationalist influences. You have those who seek integration into the emerging Eurasian space. They have their influence. You have also the influence of the compradors. And that was what was put together. This system is what Putin put together after 2000, after his elevation to the presidency. And it had all of these different component parts to it. Radical nationalist, pro-Soviet, pro-Eurasian integrationist, and comprador pro-Western. All of this is the bargains that were struck immediately after the collapse of Yeltsin and Yeltsinism. And this is what has remained in place, and the shifting balance between the different power blocks has been reflected in the different lines that the Russian government has taken. Now, how is this of relevance to today? It's of relevance to today because the policy of US imperialism toward Russia since the 90s has consistently been one of trying to break it up. Remember what Paul Wolfowitz wrote all the way back in 1992. They cannot allow a strong state to emerge anywhere on the territory of the former Soviet Union, especially Russia. That was written down in black and white all the way back in 1992 and leaked to the New York Times. So that's been the strategy of the US for 30 years. And all the way for the 90s, of course, the Yeltsin regime, because it was a purely comprador creation, was going along with this largely. It was only towards the end of the 90s when Yeltsinism and the comprador clique ran into severe trouble that they had to essentially first share power, then start to cede it entirely to a combination of like pro-Soviet elements and national bourgeois elements. This is why it's always so ridiculous when you look at the coverage of Russia in the Western press for over 20 years now and see it's all screaming about Putin this, Putin that, Putin the other. Well, Putin represents a system and a network of power blocks within Russia, that some of which are radical, some of which are reactionary, and which he balances and tries to keep together. Which explains some of the contorted and very shall we say, cyclical decisions that get made in the Russian system. Now, the good news is that the comprador element has been losing ground for quite some time, and the special military operation speeded up the losing of that ground, and this can only be a good thing. So again, let's go back to what we're talking about now, which is that the U.S. policy in Ukraine, and how is this all relevant? The U.S. policy in Ukraine is Trump is wrong about it on every single score. He's wrong about it being unaffordable, terrible, waste of money. It's not a waste of money. From the point of view of U.S. imperialism, the policy in Ukraine is not a waste of money. It is a really big investment, and it's a big investment, though, with a gigantic potential reward. The potential reward not being whatever resources Ukraine has. The potential reward has always been the end of the Putin system, which represents as I said before, a Bonapartist system that was brought in as a result of a crisis in the Russian economy, society, and state at the end of the 90s. And the Putin system was brought in to essentially re-establish the power of the state over all these different warring factions and prevent a collapse into civil war. That's what the Putin system was brought in to do, and to essentially stabilize Russian capitalism and make it into something viable. Now, Russian capitalism has remained a sickly, weak creation that has to essentially be ruled over by the state to give it any viability. But slowly but surely, the situation has been stabilized. So the aim of the imperialists, through using Ukraine, and they hoped to use Georgia as well, they hoped to use Belarus. The Baltic states can't really do much, but Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, they hoped to use those to destabilize and destroy the compromised Bonapartist system that Putin runs, or if Putin is at the center of, and essentially do to Russia what was done to Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, again, I will emphasize what I said in yesterday's broadcast on Yugoslavia and what I've said before, which is if only Milosevic had been as effective a leader as Lukashenko. Now, Lukashenko probably has an easier job, given that Belarus is not so much divided between different nationalities. But if only the Yugoslav leadership had actually succeeded in the tasks that it wanted to succeed in. Now, I'm no fan of Titoite revisionism, but had they actually succeeded in resisting the collapse of the country, then even a truncated Yugoslavia would be in a much stronger position now than modern day Serbia is, ruled over by that a collection of like wretched, compromised weaklings, personified by the likes of Vucic. If only Milosevic had actually been the ruthless, effective leader that his enemies claimed that he was, rather than the sort of late period Titoite cadre that he actually was. So we look at this in these terms, like, because the aim is, as Kaya Kallas herself, EU's foreign policy idiot in chief, blurted out, it was last year, I think, that the aim is for the breakup of Russia. Now, that's not just me dreaming this up. These are serious discussions that are had, over in the capitals of empire, and the need for the drive to destroy Russia and ultimately to try and destroy China and to destroy Iran is constant. It is constant because of the incredibly deep crisis that imperialism is in. Imperialism has been in this incredible long-term, very destructive crisis of what is a very parasitic and rotten system now since at least 2008. It cannot get out. They cannot find a way out of it. The British and the French are in a deep, deep crisis. France's crisis is magnified further by the fact that they are being driven out of their old neocolonial possessions in West Africa. The British crisis is huge, and we'll come to the British question in just a moment. But let's go back to the point where we started here. There is a strong objective need for U.S. imperialism to break up and destroy Russia. Trump saying, "Oh, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money," just proves that he doesn't understand what the fuck he's doing, and doesn't understand what he's gambling with. The British understand it slightly better. The British ruling class understand it slightly better because they know that without a win in Russia, without a win in Ukraine, which means essentially using Ukraine to destabilize Russia. Now, as I said before, the Ukrainians were never meant to win on the battlefield. That was not what was meant to happen. The war was not meant to last anything like this long. What was meant to happen was that the sanctions did the work of destabilizing the Russian economy, and then you could then move to unbalance the Putin-led system by boosting one faction over another, ideally the Comprador faction or a veiled Comprador faction, and reduced Russia to a state of civil war for which the left and patriotic forces might not necessarily prevail, or that the country just collapsed into disorder and enabled imperialism to essentially manipulate the situation, prolong the civil war, back one side then another, and cause the collapse of the country. That was the plan. Ukraine was the entry point for that. They knew damn well that Ukraine couldn't stand up if the Russian army held together, if the Russian economy didn't collapse, if the Russian state proved to be more durable. They knew that Ukraine couldn't win, but they were never meant to. This was meant to be a quick shock and awe tactics. War starts, sanctions hit, Russian economy collapses, Russian state wobbles, mobilize whatever assets you've got in Russia into the street, create the perception of a crisis of the state, try and get some faction or another to make a move on Putin, destabilize things, end the Putin system, collapse the state. That was meant to be the plan. And had they done this, had they succeeded in putting this into motion 10 or 20 years ago, if they had succeeded in doing what they originally wanted to do all the way back in 2004 or 5 with the so-called Orange Revolution and the elevation of Yushchenko completely unconstitutionally into the presidency, then if they'd have got their crisis they wanted then maybe their plan might have had a chance to succeed. You notice that the change in the coverage of Putin, when does it happen in Britain? It happens really after around about the arrest of Khodorkovsky, as I've said before. The British then realized that they were dealing with a system that was a bit more assertive, that wasn't just a sober Yeltsin, as Putin was originally described as, that there's something else going on here. And that's when they started hysterically screaming about Putin. Now, after around about 2002. Gets even more hysterical after 2004, and gets even more hysterical after the 2008 Georgian War, when it became obvious that the Russian system could bite back. And here we are. So Trump gets all of this wrong, doesn't understand the system that he's running because he represents a um, slightly idiotic lower bourgeois who aren't perhaps as connected to the higher levels of US imperialism, and therefore and represents a petty bourgeois voting base which doesn't see itself gaining any benefits from US imperialism because it's getting squeezed now, and this is why they're all freaking out and screaming that we're wasting money, etc. But the truth is, when you're talking about the affordability of imperialism, it's not that the great majority of of US workers are gaining from this. They're certainly not. Even the labor aristocracy in the US is withering away and dying now. It's that the US ruling class cannot afford to not do it. They have no choice. They must try to break up Russia. They must try to break up China. They must try to destroy Iran. If North Korea too. If they don't get any of those things, especially not the big two, then plus Iran, then their power is only going to wither away further, and I don't think they're going to get any of it. So it's not that they can't afford it; it's that they cannot afford not to do it. Like the profits of imperialism are based on their ability to exploit any market in the world, any resource in the world, to hyper exploit any source of labor in the world. And the more barriers get put up to that by states being able to defend, their basic sovereignty and independence against imperialist aggression, then the more that imperialism goes into a crisis. So yes, it's the case that the US working class cannot afford this. The US working class is not benefiting from this, but the US ruling class cannot afford not to do it. And this is the point. So, where does that leave things in terms of Trump? Trump now is insisting that Ukraine signed this new mineral deal, um, which is which is basically a textbook example of like utter neocolonialism. Now, I'll just read to you directly from the Financial Times, which reported on this just the other day. I will just put the link in the chat if you haven't seen it before. Let's take a look at that. So, the Financial Times reports the following today. No, this is a story from 3 days ago. So, Financial Times reports the following: the Trump administration's new proposal would supersede the previous mineral deal framework agreement on jointly developing Ukraine's resources agreed last month by Kiev and Washington. That deal, which would have established a fund into which Ukraine contributed 50% of future profits from mineral resources, was never signed after a disastrous Oval Office meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Under the new proposal, projects covered by the fund would include those carried out by the Ukrainian government itself, as well as by companies approved by Kiev or state-owned organizations. The deal also covers infrastructure connected to the exploitation of natural resources, such as roads, railways, pipelines, ports, and processing plants. Funds generated under the project, under the latest proposal, will be converted directly into foreign currency and routed abroad, and Ukraine will be liable for compensation in the event of delays or disputes. The US would receive royalties from the fund before Ukraine at a 4% premium and would retain priority rights on infrastructure projects as well as veto power over third-party sales of resources. While the deal does not include provisions for the US ownership of Ukraine's nuclear power infrastructure, Ukrainian officials remain wary that nuclear assets could still be on the table in future negotiations. So let's just backtrack here and work out what this means. Basically, what the Trump administration is presenting to Ukraine. And if you want to read the whole document, it's in like legalese and is written under the laws of Delaware. So this is U.S. Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, a Delaware limited partnership. Now, if I'm remembering this correctly, this Delaware was Biden's old state, and Delaware has some of the loosest company regulations in the United States. So they are going to one of the dirtiest states in the US for lack of corporate regulation to establish a Ukraine US Reconstruction Investment Fund written in under the laws of Delaware, which is astonishing that they come out in the open and say it, but I'm glad they have. So This I'm going to be reading through all of this over the next few days. I think we're going to cover this a lot because it's a marvelously educational document, as is the Financial Times report on it. Um, Now, what this does is it brings out into the open what's already been done to Ukrainian agricultural land, which is why, like you have bourgeois newspapers in Britain screaming about how terrible this is. It's not that this hasn't been done before; it's that Trump and his gang, in their usual very very crude ways, has brought out into the open what's already been established as fact. If you go back and watch the program that I did on Ukraine's debt and Ukraine's farmland, Ukraine's already a neocolony of the United States in particular. The Europeans have got their share of the action, the British have got their slice of the action, but it's a neocolony principally of the US. Now, the way in which this is written basically appoints like a five-man board to run the Ukrainian mineral extraction industries. Three of the members of that board are all appointed by the US, meaning that the US gets to control every single aspect of the Ukrainian mineral extraction industries, and according to the report in the FT, everything related to them. So that's all infrastructure related to them, all related industries, everything, lock, stock, and fucking barrel, is now, if this deal gets pushed through, is going to be owned and controlled by the US. It is an absolutely naked act of neo-colonialism. In fact, I might go further. It's the re-establishment of like almost direct colonialism. And it's the only thing that surprises me about it really is that the US is now being so open about it. And it's being so open about it, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, it suits the political perspectives of the Trump gang, a crude bunch of pirates who are basically thinking that they can just make up for their losses by like robbing Ukraine blind. But this is where they don't understand what's really going on, because the real deal was always about Russia. It was never about Ukraine. Ukraine was a means to an end. Trump thinks he can sell this to his domestic base by saying, "Look, I got all the money back. That Zelensky guy, he gave me all of Ukraine." Ukraine was never the prize. It was never the prize. So Trump's crude bank robbery that he's trying to pull off is essentially, at best, very paltry compensation for what was meant to be a gigantic win for US imperialism, which was about the destruction of Russia. Getting hold of Ukraine's natural resources and robbing the poor Ukrainians blind, well, that's not going to do much to revive US imperialism. Like 350 billion, trying to recoup 350 billion isn't really going to do a lot to revive the sickly state of the US imperialist economy. Basically running Ukraine as a colony isn't going to do a lot for them either. Yeah, they'll make some profits out of it, but the destruction of Russia was about far more, or the plan to destroy Russia was about far more than just simple profiteering. It was about taking out a rival. It was about destroying an alternative center of power in the world. It was about destroying the emergent multipolar system and essentially securing US hegemony for another few decades by taking out a potential source of, shall we say, alternative power in the world. Bear in mind some of the things that the Russian Federation does, such as militarily backing up Venezuela or Cuba or North Korea. If you like when the Soviet Union fell, you managed to destroy the Russian Federation. You then get an angle on all the countries, or get to work an angle on all the countries that gained from the Russian Federation's existence and the Russian Federation's assistance to them. So Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, DPRK would all suffer greatly had the Russian Federation gone down to defeat. And this is why the prize is so much bigger than just what goes on in Ukraine. Yes, a bunch of crooked politicians like the Bidens and the Kerrys and the Pelosi's got to wet their beaks in the spoils of Ukraine. But again, that's just standard corruption. That's not the real prize. So Trump doing a naked resource grab, coming out into the open and essentially acting like a pirate. Again, if you look at the way in which Ukrainian farmland's been gobbled up by like agribusiness from the US and Europe, this isn't exactly new. They've been doing this for decades. They were doing this before the Maidan coup. Like crooked Ukrainian oligarchs were selling off land to Western agribusiness at very low rates and essentially selling the country off by the pound. So again, not new, but the astonishing thing is that the Trump gang have been this crude and this open about it. And from our point of view, we welcome the fact that they have been. Because this is the real face of US imperialism, which is literally, we're going to come in, we're going to put a gun to your head, and we're going to fucking hijack your resources. And let's be honest, like the rhetoric of Trump towards Ukraine is grotesque. It is grotesque. You might think that Zelensky, and I do think that Zelensky is a horrendous, coke-addled little shit. But I think of him like that because he is a stooge who has sold Ukraine for pennies on the dollar to US imperialism and has sacrificed millions of Ukrainian lives for the schemes of the US and the British in particular. That's why Zelensky's disgusting. It's not because he turns up demanding money. It's like I agree with Lukashenko, which is Zelensky acts properly because he was promised the world, and then he turns up and asks for it, and he's told, "Oh, by the way, that money that we gave you and those resources that we gave you, we're going to want that all back. By the way, you should grovel and kiss our feet." It's disgusting. The US destroys this country, and the British. Let's not forget them. The US and the British destroy their country. Then the US thief in chief turns around and goes, "You should be very grateful to me. This is a great opportunity for you." It's revolting, and it's revolting that so many people pretend that they don't understand this. They pretend, oh well, there's no US interest in Ukraine. Of course, there's a US interest in Ukraine. Of course, there is. This project's been running a long time for precisely that reason. So, the other reason, of course, why Trump might be presenting this, or somebody in Trump's inner circle might be pushing this deal, which is going to be like wholly unacceptable and very difficult for Zelensky to accept, is precisely because some people who have got a bit more brains in Trump's inner circle might be presenting this in the full expectation that it will be turned down. Because to accept this blatant act of colonialism from the US would kill Zelensky's reputation stone dead in Ukraine, if it's not dead already. He's literally selling the country out in the open. Again, this has been done undercover, veiled, in a veiled way, in a more subtle way for years. But this is like bringing the whole process right out into the open. This is like gun in the face, give me your money time. And Zelensky signs over the country to the US. That will finish him. It'll finish him. He'll be fucked. And if he refuses to sign it, well, then that gives the Trump administration a great excuse to actually pull out of Ukraine, which is what some of them want to do. The Trump administration is not unified on this by any means. Some of them, like Vance, want to pull out so they can focus on making war against either fucking Iran or China or both. Others want to keep themselves engaged in Ukraine in the hope that they can just spin the war out as long as possible. This is also the hope of the British and the French, who are desperate for the war to continue. Again, in the vain hope that the sanctions will kick in, that Russia's economy will collapse, that something will happen, that Putin will drop dead, whatever, and that they can somehow prevail. So their only plan, the Europeans and their allies in the US, is to spin the war out as long as they can. And so this is why Starmer and Macron keep going on and on and on about, oh, we're going to send 35,000 British bare-skinned warriors over there. We're going to send 50,000 men, 100,000 men, whatever, fantasy island figures. The only reason they keep going on and on about it is because this is meant to bolster Zelensky and to keep Ukraine in the fight. That's the only reason they're going on about it. They know they can't do it. They know they can't do it. They know the US won't back them up. This was never meant to be a war in which the US and the British and the French got into a direct shooting match, at least an acknowledged one, with the Russians. This was always meant to be an outsourced, offshore war that that 90% of the population in the imperial core countries had no idea was even happening. That's what it was meant to be. And this is what Starmer would still like it to be, but it's all going wrong. But his only plan, and the only plan of the British manipulators in Whitehall, is to keep Ukraine fighting. And this is why Keir Starmer keeps coming out and saying, "Going to send troops." Or Macron keeps saying that he's going to march the Grande Armée all the way to Moscow or something. It's all designed to bolster Zelensky and keep him actually in place. That's what this is all about. It's not about sending British troops to Ukraine. That it is a manipulation. It's designed to keep Zelensky afloat because he can turn around and say, "Now look, the British and French are coming. They are coming over They're coming over the hill. Give money." The way in which this is being talked up constantly is designed to just again keep Ukraine on its feet, just barely keep the money flowing in, keep the various people in Kiev paid off, and to hope that something will happen at some point. It's to give them the win that they're looking for. That's the plan. It's not about sending British forces into Ukraine. They would never take that risk uh, directly, and not without the full US backing. And they know they're not going to get full US backing. And they know that they can't fight the Russians. Their own generals have told them this time and time again. And contrary to popular belief, I don't think Starmer is a madman. I think he's a cynical bastard who should be locked up. But I don't think he's a lunatic. He's doing what he's told by the intelligence men and by the Psy War guys, because the Psy War is being waged on Ukraine. That's who are the biggest targets of this psychological operation that Starmer and Macron are trying to pull off. They are trying to essentially convince Ukrainians that the West is on the march to them. We'll be in Sebastopol by June, that kind of thing. But no, the West isn't coming. The West was never coming. They're never going to turn up in Ukraine. They're not in an open fashion anyway. There's plenty of them who've been there and who've been involved in the fighting, and many of whom have died. But that will never be acknowledged. The Russians have killed plenty of them. It'll be described as horrific road traffic accident kills American soldiers in Latvia. Terrible helicopter crash kills American Special Forces unit in Iowa. Terrible, unfortunate incident where U.S. colonel accidentally brutally cuts his own head off whilst combing his hair. It might look like he was hit in the face with an FPV drone, but in reality, he was just taking a stroll out one night, and a bowling ball fell from a great height and hit him in the head. Tragedy that such a great soldier died that way, etc., etc. And we know that the French have lost a load of guys and military instructors. That we know the British have as well. They will never acknowledge those casualties, because to acknowledge it would be acknowledge the truth of the situation, which is that this is an outsourced war that is being run here. So to go back to the deal, if the Ukrainians reject it, that gives the faction in the US that wants to leave and wants to get out the opportunity to say, well, we tried. These ungrateful Ukrainians wouldn't sign on with our amazing deal. Therefore, Mr. President, we have no choice. We have to get out. That's clearly the plan for some of them, at least. I think that Starmer and Macron will try and convince Zelensky to sign a version of this to try and keep the US essentially in play. But that's going to be hugely difficult for Zelensky. It's going to basically destroy what authority he has left, if any. And it's going to put the Ukrainian regime in an even more invidious position. So the point of a defeat is coming, though. To come back to the point of the origin of our discussion here tonight, the point of defeat is coming very soon. The Russians have between 700,000 and 1 million men that they could be using in Ukraine. They're only using a percentage of relatively small percentage of those right now, using them to rotate troops out. A lot of the really heavy fighting is still being done by the units that are based on the old Donbass militias. More and more units are getting ready for action now. The way in which the Russian government is talking implies that they know very well that the talks with the US are going to go probably nowhere. What they'll do, as I've said before, is re-establish diplomatic relations with the US, talk endlessly about economic partnership, etc., which will go absolutely nowhere. The US isn't US imperialism is not interested in economic partnerships with the Russians. Not really. They're interested in subjugating and destroying Russia, and the fact that the Russians started to put conditions on US and European investment inside Russia all the way back in 2007. That's part of what caused the massive uptick in hostility towards Russia anyway. The fact that the US and the Europeans, the Germans and the French and the British, regarded Russia as a neo-colony to be exploited at will, when the Russian government turned around and said, well, we're not doing that anymore, that's again what started to cause the hostility to mount up. So the US isn't interested in partnership with Russia, no matter what some YouTubers might imagine. Any US investment in Russia is only going to be designed to do one thing, and that is build up the forces of the comprador bourgeoisie in Russia. That's what it's designed to do. So there will be, I don't think there will be any kind of deal to end the war. The Europeans and the pro-war, pro-continuation of the war faction in the US will get what they want, which is that they will get to continue the war, and they want to force the Russians to come out and have to deal a direct defeat, a defeat and a collapse of the Kiev regime. And that will have a benefit to Starmer or Wes Streeting, perhaps by that stage, or whoever is running France by then, because what it will do is it will enable them to turn to their populations and say, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. We must have more domestic repression, etc., etc., which is what, and I will conclude on this point, which is what the purpose of military mobilizations and militarism really is in the West, in Britain and France in particular, and Germany. It's partially about Russia, but they stand no chance of actually fighting Russia, not for 5 years, not for 10 years. So what's the real aim of militarism and increasing military spending and increasing domestic repression? The real aim is internal control. Yes, there are other elements to it, but I would argue that the biggest element here is to try and whip up fear of, the imminent Russian invasion, which is never going to happen, by the way, just like there was never going to be a Soviet invasion of Western Europe either. It's all bullshit. But they want to use the fear that they're trying to generate of the Russians to justify all manner of assaults on the domestic working class. It's true in all of the EU countries, particularly like the G7 imperialist countries. It's true in Britain too. That's what they're really interested in now. They kind of know they're fucked, that they're not going to defeat the Russians. They can't do anything about the Chinese. There's all this impotent wailing about Iran. They can't do anything to Iran. They can't. Well, they could try. They could launch a bombing campaign. They could try to launch some kind of ill-fated terrorist action. But then again, the entire oil and gas infrastructure of the Middle East goes up in smoke if they try and do that, and it won't work. They won't be able to destroy Iran that way, and the entire global economy crashes. So the Brits know that they're screwed. So what's the plan? Well, the only plan they have left available to them now is to essentially try to revive British capitalism by increasing the exploitation of the domestic working class, given that they're going to be pushed out of the markets that they've dominated overseas for such a long time. They're going to try and increase the rate of exploitation of the domestic working class. And they can only do that by immiserating and repressing the domestic working class. And that's why they're using the foreign threat to justify a vast expansion of the military, police, and security apparatus. It's meant to be, it's going to be directed internally. That's what it's going to be doing. That's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be directing the repression inside Britain itself, not externally, because they can't fight the Russians, they can't fight the Chinese, and they can't fight the Iranians. and they're running out of proxies to use. So the next wave of this, when the Ukraine war winds down and the full horror of the massive defeat imperialism has suffered becomes clear, we can expect the imperialist powers to turn inward. That is the next phase. I think that the fact that they have been essentially double sixed by the Russians, they can't hope to take on the Chinese. They can't hope to take on Iran either. They can't hope to take on the DPRK. That means they're coming inside. They're going to turn internally, and they're going to come at us. And that's going to be a more than a slightly terrifying sight to see. But we're dealing with a desperate, ramshackle bunch, desperate bourgeoisie in Britain, which is running out of options and is going to try and launch a direct assault on the British working class as a whole. That's something they've managed to avoid until now, preferring to attack a bit of the working class at a time. I think we're seeing a potential for a full escalation of the domestic class war coming up. It'll be much more intense and much more brutal than we've seen before, and it will be happening within the next couple of years. And that'll be the byproduct of the defeat inflicted upon imperialism by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Right. Okay, so 46 minutes in, let's go back through the comments and just see who we've got with us. So, what do we got here? Hello to Abtin, who's enjoying the stream. Good to have you with us. Yeah, we're going to be aiming. I've been thinking about ways to develop the program further. There's a couple of things in the pipeline which are going to be out soon. So keep an eye out for that. But I'm going to be aiming, if I possibly can, to stream at least 5 to 6 times a week. I think the situation merits it, and I want to develop the channel further. So further things coming, shall we say? Hello to Dingo Ate Me Baby on Rumble. Hello to Aid in Mexico City. Looking to do a program on Mexico pretty soon, actually. Hello to Robert Svorinich. Hello to Bruce Albert, Christopher Rogers, Heidi Edelweiss, Just a Maverick, and Agricola, and T.G. Wilson, who says the peace president's given Netanyahu the green light to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Well, so did Biden, to be completely blunt about it. He's bombing Yemen on a daily basis, edging toward war with Iran, and wants to buy Greenland and annex Canada. Yeah, well, President of Peace, there you go. They will create a barren desert and call it peace. I think that's the line from the Tacitus's histories. Hello to Vera. Hello to Jenny, our moderator. Good to have you with us. And hello to, let's have a look, Comrade Daniel, and to Davey, and to Zane Mudassir, Comrade Ian Foster, Pablo Popova, Evgeny Nikolaev, who joins us from Sweden, Rupert Fellows, who says correctly they want to do to Russia what they did to Yugoslavia. Entirely correct. Hello to Jace Hart, and thanks to all those we've got viewing at the moment. We have 15 of you on Rumble, 1 on Locals, 268 of you on YouTube, 1 on Twitch. And let's go over to look at the numbers on X. So we have 230 of you currently watching on X. Again, be sure to like and share the stream, subscribe to the various platforms, and join us in building the channel. So David King says, is it true Russia and China have stopped sales of antimode, a mineral needed for weapons? Explains Trump's land grabs for Greenland, Canada to hunt antimode. I have heard of the various mineral export freezes that the Chinese have done. Yeah, I'll need to look at that further. Hello to Jessica as well, and Lingy Lou, who joins us from the Mormon Vatican. I'm guessing you're in Salt Lake City then. A place I've driven past it, I think, years and years ago, all the way back in 1997, almost 30 years ago now. Zane makes the correct observation that you need a tough leadership against imperialism. You do indeed. and you need a leadership who will educate and empower the masses, because that's the greatest strength of any system, of any revolutionary system against imperialism. So that's why the Ansar Allah survive and have, in relative terms, thrived against imperialist attacks. It's why Venezuela has survived. It's why Nicaragua has survived. It's why Cuba has survived. It's why the DPRK survives. Hello to Aziz. Hello to Alexander Lukta. Hello to Jonathan C. 10% to the big guy. Yeah. Well, in Biden, I mean, the petty corruption of the US politicians in Ukraine is just really fucking petty, small scale fucking theft. I mean, it's big numbers for those of us who have fuck all money, but like, it's like petty stuff, really. It's like pennies compared to the big prize the US bourgeoisie was looking at. They were just, making sure that their servants, like Biden, got to wet their beaks a little bit. T.G. Wilson says, fun fact, the French in the 50s taught the Israelis how to build nukes and then tested them for them in the Sahara and South Pacific. Good old French imperialism. A disgrace, as always. The Rupert says, the French built the Dimona nuclear plant for Israel. Yes. Agricola says, sometimes I think Prigozhin was designated president in case their plan to destabilize Russia had worked. I've heard that one before, and Prigozhin had some dodgy links to Britain and to the Ukrainian regime itself. I always thought that his bellicose super patriot act was just that, an act. Let's go further. Zane says falling rates of profits make them desperate. That's true. Hello to David King. Von der Leyen using washing machine chips. That's true. Aziz says mineral deal is absolutely disgusting. US overthrew legit Ukrainian government, put a puppet in power, destroyed Ukraine, and now want to steal Ukrainian assets and resources. Yep. Keel Jones says Delaware is a notorious tax haven in the US, and yes, Biden state. Zain Madassir says Delaware has strictest corporate property laws. Yeah, you can tell that just by looking at the fucking contract. Alistair Page McGill says absolutely insane open corruption. Well, why is anybody surprised? But yes, you're right. What else we got? Kiwi Corner says NATO wants to make Russia the next Yugoslavia so that they can divide into smaller nation states so they can asset strip it of all resources. And Kiwi Corner is exactly correct about that. Agricola says, didn't the Brits have their own 100-year contract? Yeah, they did, but I think that if I haven't seen what's exactly in that yet. They've kept that quite secret, so we'll have to see what turns up there in terms of leaks. But yeah, the rumor was, I've not seen it confirmed, that the Brits wanted to grab all the resources in Ukraine, and now the Americans are trying to grab them. So this is the thing about the imperialist bloc. They all unite to a degree against their enemies, but they're constantly knifing each other in the back and trying to undermine each other. You have to bear this in mind. All right, just going through some more of the chat here. Alistair says, so sad many Ukrainians still see the US as their gracious savior in the face of Russian aggression. The aggression was always from the imperialists. Always. Hello to Comrade Naylor, who's with us. Hello to Mike Priest, Slumbering Colossus in Ohio. Tyler Thompson, who enjoys the Zelensky impression. Hello, I am Vladimir Zelensky. I am greatest comedian in all of Ukraine. Come to the show. Come to the show now tonight, live at Las Vegas. I will be doing the whole routine. I will be asking for money from the audience. It's a big joke. I will be doing the routine where I play piano with my dick. It is great tune. I have learnt on. I have Liberace's old piano, and I play the Star Spangled Banner with my penis on it. Come tonight. Book early to avoid disappointment. etc., etc. That's what he's going to be doing. If he's lucky, he gets a Vegas show. If he gets really unlucky, he gets an Atlantic City show. If he's really unlucky, he gets to come over here and do a Blackpool show. Just a Maverick says Starmer isn't smart enough to be a madman. Starmer is a functionary, and only a functionary. He does what he's told. And he's not a very good actor either, which is why he looks such a fucking moron. But no, he's not a lunatic. There's a plan here that he's delivering on. It's not a good plan. It's a monstrous plan. It's a plan cooked up by a group of monstrous parasites, but it doesn't involve really marching off to war, not directly. Again, it's a cynical, brutal, cowardly plan to sacrifice the entire Ukrainian nation on the off chance they might get to damage the Russians. It won't work, but that's the plan he's acting under. Yepek says, I saw that your friends from the Class Consciousness Project shared an article about mothers and unpaid labor. Yes, very good article, co-written by Comrade Rick and myself. Be sure to check it out if you haven't done so already. Hello to Gonzalo Cabrera. Glad you're enjoying the program. Slumbering Colossus says, everyone I take seriously has been laughing nonstop at Macron's Napoleon LARPing. Yeah, well, I'll believe he's serious when he institutes like the kind of vast upscale in industrial production you would need to sustain a war with the Russians for even a week. I would say also that you can tell that Starmer isn't serious about actually producing enough war material to take on the Russians, the Chinese, because he's letting the British steel industry go to the wall. You need steel if you're going to lots of it if you're going to produce the kind of army that can go and take on Russia or China. Starmer's letting the steel industry slide. I mean, there's one nationalised British steel plant in Sheffield, like Scunthorpe plants being allowed to go to the wall or wither away. The plant in South Wales has been withering away. So, like, you're telling me that this guy is serious about upscaling industrial production for the purposes of waging a war? No. That's why I say that the militarism and the repression are all about a war that will be waged in the near future domestically. And that's what we have to prepare for. Just a Maverick says, it is interesting that the Washington Post, the deep state paper of record, came out with an article detailing US participation in the Ukrainian conflict. Why did they do it? Because, well, for various reasons. I think various characters in the deep state or the permanent bureaucracy of the United States have come to the conclusion that this war is a loser, that they're not going to get what they want out of it. And so best to start confessing now. And also, Trump himself and Vance have come out and Rubio have all come out and openly admitted it. So I think that's encouraged people in the intelligence services to come out and give this all to the Washington Post. So it's a sign to me that they are really looking for a way out. The US has a bit more flexibility than the Europeans do. It has still more of an industrial base, though not much, and still hopes to get what it wants out of like destabilizing Iran or China. It's not going to get any of that, but essentially the dominant faction in the US ruling class has decided that the Ukraine war is a losing battle for them, and they want to get out. Hence why all the leaks. Caustic Grip says, when has imperialism ever been interested in partnerships? It ain't, and it never will be either. So various people on the internet who suggest that it is and claim to be Marxists need to pull their head out of their fucking asses. Daniel says, long live the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, especially now coming up to 80 years since the victory over fascism. Good point from Daniel. Right. Iran just threatened to bomb Diego Garcia if America or Britain attacked them. Well, quite right. Like, why should the Iranians take the threats of the British and the Americans without illustrating the point that they can and will strike back at them, and it will be very messy for the US. Trump thinks that he can scream at the Iranians and threaten them, and that then the Iranians will capitulate to him. He's wrong. on a variety of levels. First of all, even though you've got an idiot in the charge of in the Iranian presidency in the form of Pezeshkian does not have unlimited power. The big decisions are still in the hands of Ayatollah Khamenei, and also there's a huge cross section of Iranian society that would be mobilized in defense of the Iranian state and Iranian sovereignty and independence should the US try and attack them. So these threats aren't going to work. It's long past time where this act convinced anybody. Noor82 says the Australians here seriously believe in a Chinese invasion. When asked a young man what proof, he said the Chinese would do this. He replied, "Mate, haven't you heard of Genghis Khan?" Yes, well, why would the Chinese need to invade Australia? They can get everything they want out of Australia just by trading with them. Why would you bother? Seriously. And the Australians should wake the fuck up as to who their real friends are, because the aim of ultimately, if the Taiwan thing doesn't work, if the Filipino thing doesn't work, then the Australians will be the ones that get shoved into the firing line by the US and the British. So the Australians need to pull their head out of their Aussie asses and take a look at like what's being done to them by the set of stooges that sit in Canberra. Seriously, the Australian masses need to wake the fuck up and like get rid of the current setup, because otherwise it could be messy. Right. Let's have a look. Okay, so I'm on Red Star Radio channel now. Previously, I was on Melzum 1870. Right. Okay, so I'm on another channel on Twitch. That's interesting. Okay. Hello to Stig Pedersen. He says, a sure sign that the warmongering is about creating fear is clear here in Denmark, where each second ad or public notice contains the word safety or security. The Danes are clearly frightened as fuck. Danish ruling class clearly are, which is why they're trying to terrify the population into submission. Right, just scrolling down. Rupert says the British Army is only good for policing operations and enforcing martial law. Well, that's exactly what it's going to be used for. Daniel says, even with increased militarism in Britain, they'll have to deal with the contradiction that for now, younger people have little interest in joining the state forces. Yes, we'll see how they manage to deal with that particular contradiction that is going on there. Rapunzel says, I hear the Australian strategy was to survive until the USA comes. Great strategy. I'm sure that'll work out for them. Fucking hell. Okay, so we are going to be drawing things to a close in just a moment, but a couple of business announcements coming up. We're going to be back with you tomorrow, same time, for a Monday Q&A, so keep an eye out for that. And then going to be back with you on Tuesday for another live stream, probably earlier in the day. Wednesday is the day we're going to be recording the Decline and Fall show. So be sure to look out for that one. And then more live streams on Thursday and Friday. So keep an eye out for all of that. Okay, so drawing things to a close for tonight. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. More audio uploads to follow on Patreon. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Your support helps this project keep going. So come join us at 10 o'clock tomorrow when we're going to be doing the Monday Q&A. And you can throw all the questions you want at me and I will endeavor to answer them. All right. Thanks, everybody who has tuned in. We've got a really good audience tonight, at least 296 of you on the main platforms. And how many do we have watching on on X. That's 280 odd on X as well. Really good numbers tonight. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Back with you again tomorrow, and I will leave you with the following thought. If you are, as you all should be, concerned that the ruling class in Britain, France, US is going to launch a ferocious offensive inside your country, you are right to be concerned. The only plausible thing that can really help us overcome this offensive that is certainly coming towards us is proper working class organization. Most specifically, proper organization in the form of a Marxist-Leninist party. That is why I would encourage everybody, particularly in Britain, the country that I sit in right now, to, if you agree with the perspectives that have been outlined here, and if you agree upon the need for class struggle to be waged back against the ruling class, then I would encourage everybody to sign up as a supporter of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, the only party in Britain that actually takes the job of delivering real political education to the masses seriously. Only with the correct revolutionary theory can there be revolutionary practice. Because if you don't understand the revolutionary theory, if you're not guided by it, if you're not able to calculate and analyze the actions of the ruling class, then you're going to be forever blindsided by the ruling class. That's why the old line from Lenin is always true. Without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary practice. Without a solid core of communists trained properly in Marxism-Leninism, there can be no progress in this country. Not real progress, anyway. And that is what we aim to do. And I would encourage anybody out there who's on the fence about it to look at the situation around you, look at the actions of the ruling class, look how desperate things are getting, and to join us in actually promoting the education of the masses, the political education of the masses, and the leading and the creation of, ultimately, a communist party that can really be a vanguard. And ourselves are the only ones doing that. Now, I'm not going to comment on what people should join in the US or elsewhere. In America, I would encourage people to research the ACP and to look into that and to draw their own conclusions. But I think its formation is a positive development. I would encourage comrades also, if you're watching in other countries, which I haven't mentioned, to go and look at those who are signed, the parties signed up to the World Anti-Imperialist Platform as a means of sort of starting to research into what could be possible for you to join in your country. Because, again, without political training, without organizational development, we will be in no position to resist the war that will be waged upon us by our relevant ruling classes. And I will leave you with that thought for tonight. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for listening. Be back with you again tomorrow.